strategy analysis. This knowledge area is going to be a little more intense. Okay, so let's get into this. What does strategy mean to you, and why do you think it's important? Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yes. So it makes sure we're doing things that matter, right? Make sure that we're leveraging things effectively. Make sure that we're, yes. Yes, it can. Yes, it can. Yep. I would agree with that. So on some of these things, I want you to, the words, again, everything in parentheses is adaptive specific and is not necessarily Babok specific. Babok does not see the business analyst as an IT resource. Adaptive adds these things in parentheses because a lot of business analysts are in the IT world, and it's hopefully helps you relate to it. But it does not necessarily, the business analyst goes beyond IT. So it's about, so when we're talking about strategy, the strategy analysis area, it's about ensuring that we're utilizing the capabilities of our environment as effective as possible so that we can achieve those goals and objectives. So it's exactly what you guys both said. It makes sure that we're focusing on those long-term goals and objectives, but doing it as effectively as possible. So when we talk about strategy, we're going to ensure that we're documenting and understanding the strategic business needs. So no fluff, avoiding the gold plating. These are, what do we really need? A need is very, very different than a want. We want to focus on the need, and that's what this is all about, is ensuring that we're being strategic about it, doing things that really help the organization get where they need or where they need to be. What are their goals? Our role is about enabling the organization or the enterprise to get where they're wanting to be, and the ability to address that need. And when we do this work, we're collaborating with stakeholders to ensure that we align that strategy with other strategies. So we need to align our change strategy with the overall organization strategy. Maybe in order to do that, we have multiple changes going on at once. We need to ensure that we're being strategic about our attempt to address all of those, make sure that they support one another, make sure that we're doing them in a way concurrently that help us be as efficient and effective as possible in getting to that end goal, right? And when we talk about strategic analysis, a lot of people think that it's that big period of time up front that we spend trying to define what's the real need, where are we trying to go, what are the options to get there, and they see that as something that happens in the beginning, and then you just do requirements analysis and design from that point forward. But that's not the case. Every time a change happens, we do strategy analysis. It might be a 5-minute visit. That might be all that it is. It could be a 5-month visit. It just really depends on, where are you in your change efforts? How complex is this new understanding if I've uncovered something new? There are all kinds of things that come into play when we're talking about strategy analysis. But it's something we do it a lot more heavily in the beginning of change. But every time something happens, when we're, once that first piece is done and we're in that iterative process of improving and identifying the details, anytime in that process where we learn something new or something changes our understanding, we revisit strategy analysis. We just don't do it as heavily. It doesn't require as much effort because now we're just clarifying our original understanding of strategy, making sure that this piece fits in that bigger piece. So it is an ongoing activity. Every time something changes, every time more information comes available, we revisit it. And depending on the level of the change, how complex is the change will influence how much effort is it when we revisit strategy analysis. Because that's where we decide are we going to actually address this or not. It's the strategy analysis knowledge area that decides whether something is worth doing. That's where we figure that out. Okay, because this is where we define what is our actual value that we expect to derive from this change. And based on what we uncover here, the strategy planning is going to be based on how predictable something is, right? So when we think about these things and we think about doing strategy analysis and we're trying to figure out whether we want to do this thing or not, we're going to have to ask ourselves some questions. Now, when we do that, the first thing is predictability. We're going to talk about predictability for a minute. We have a change that we need to do. Lots of other people have done it. That's predictable because it's been done often enough that although you might have some variations, you can pretty much predict a lot of it, right? So if that is the case, it's a lot easier, not easy, it's just easier for us to define those future states. Where are we trying to go? What does it look like as we're shifting? And that means it's a lot easier for us to plan a strategy to help that change come to fruition. For example, ERP. A lot of companies have done that. Many companies have shifted into an ERP platform. And you can probably look at all those organizations that have done that, find an organization that is at least somewhat similar to your current situation, and leverage their experience to help you plan your experience. That doesn't mean it's going to be exactly the same. It won't. But you can predict a lot of it. You know, especially if you look at multiple organizations that have had a similar make and model of your organization, you know, similar makeup, you can actually kind of predict what your future will look like with the expectation that there will be some differences. So that's easier. Now, when something's unpredictable, you're going to have a lot of emphasis on several things because you don't know what you don't know, right? I mean, you don't know what you don't know in the predictable as well, but you can control that a little bit better. You can figure those things out a little better. But when you're trying to do something that hasn't really been done before and that you can't find other examples for, then you're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on risks because what you don't know is a risk. You're also, when you can't find precedent from somewhere else, you're going to have a lot of assumptions you're going to make. For every assumption, there's a risk, and you're going to have to test those assumptions as you go. So you're going to spend a lot of time testing those assumptions. You're also going to have a lot more effort going into the process of what are some feasible strategies. If it's never been done before and you don't have some historical stuff to look at or some precedents to consider for what other people have done from a strategy perspective, you're going to have to actually say, oh, well, I guess we could do this or this or this, and which ones are more feasible than the other, and what are the potential outcomes of each. So those will be some things that you will be spending more emphasis on. For example, Apple, they started out building computers, right? They decided they wanted to build a phone. Well, they built a phone completely different than anyone else did in their early years, right? Or the iPod. No one had done anything like the iPod before they did the iPod. So that's an extremely unpredictable thing. They had to guess a lot at what people would want. So they had a lot of different ways they probably evaluated doing that. They made a lot of assumptions. They spent time managing a lot of risks. So that's a situation where you're trying to implement a change that no one's done before. So it's unpredictable. So there's a lot more risk. So you spend a lot of time doing these things. So either way, whether it's predictable or unpredictable, where do we find that strategy? Where do we document it? Maybe it's already existing and we're going to evaluate, do we fit in it? So we want to go look at it. You're going to look at your strategic plan. Now, if you're in an environment that's a lot more mature with business analysis, you might actually have business analysts involved in strategic planning for an organization, and they'll help write the strategic plan. If you're not, and you're in an environment where the business analyst truly is an IT resource, then you might influence the IT strategic plan And you might question, does this change fit in that plan, and does it fit in the overall organization strategic plan? So really you'll just go find the strategic plan to look at it, right? Either way, strategy is often, or should be, captured in a strategic plan. If you're talking about a specific product area, you are a business analyst that works on a specific product, you should be able to find what you want in the vision and the roadmap for the product. You should be able to go to those places in order to see what is the current strategy for this product, and then evaluate the change that you're making and see, does it fit within that? Should that be changed? Or should this expectation of this requirement be changed, right? You'll look at those things. If you're in a position where you are evaluating need that's been brought to you, it's already been ensured that it falls within the strategic plan of the organization, but you need to find the right solution, you'll build a business case. You'll be the primary resource that helps fill out a business case that justifies resolving this problem and what solution options were considered and which one was chosen. So you would be involved in defining the business case. So those are the areas you might find strategy. The tasks, there are a lot fewer tasks in this knowledge area, but this knowledge area is pretty heavy. So we're going to talk about analyzing current state and defining future. We're going to discuss how to assess and manage risks, and we're going to discuss defining change strategy. So those are the tasks that we will be covering. So what I've just discussed with you is just the introduction to strategy analysis. We're going to discuss a lot more detail that will help make those things much more clear. But do you have any immediate questions or anything that I should discuss with you before we hit the actual steps of discussing current and future state? Okay. Right, that would be more predictable. You would still have some elements that are unpredictable, like maybe if you're adding a new feature, right? But at that point, your level of predictability is higher than your unpredictability. So you can have change that is kind of a blend of predictability and unpredictability. So your iPhone success is pretty predictable. Maybe the success of this specific feature is not predictable, and you do a little bit more assumption with that feature. So you can still have a blend. My pleasure. Any other questions before we move to the first task? A business case is not necessarily a feasibility study. A feasibility study is done separate from a business case. So to build a business case, you take the results of a feasibility study. A feasibility study is more like, is this solution feasible in this environment, right? So you'll do that, and you'll do a feasibility study for is it feasible to even address this problem? That's the very first thing you do. Is it reasonable to do this? If you look at the problem or opportunity that's been brought to you and you can immediately assess that the level of effort to address that problem far outweighs the value that you would get from it, you don't even get to a business case. You don't even get to solution evaluation. You just make a recommendation that you just don't see the value behind it. Let's say you get past that and you're getting to the point where, okay, it's definitely worth addressing this need. We need to do that. It's feasible to address the need. Now I need to actually do a feasibility study on the solution options. How feasible are each of these solution options for our environment so that I can narrow it down to only those solution options that would be feasible to implement. Now, once I've done that, now I have to make a business case around a recommendation for one of those. So then I take the results of those feasibility studies, which usually involve things like scorecards and stuff like that. How how well do each of these options meet our need? What's the cost benefit of each? And that's where your business case comes in. The business case says, this is the problem or opportunity. This is where we are today. This is what we're trying to solve for. These are the things we considered for solving it. This is the one we recommend and why. That's a business case. It takes into consideration the results of your feasibility studies. Does that help? You bet. Any other questions? Correct. I would agree with that. Yep. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So let's get into the first task in strategy analysis. We are going to talk about where we are, analyzing current state. I don't know the story behind this, so I'm going to skip this. I tell you my stories all throughout this stuff. Okay, so the purpose of analyzing current state. Let me ask you, when you guys go into change, and you start and someone says, okay, so this is our problem, we need to solve this, so what does tomorrow look like? That's immediately what they jump to, right? And how do they respond when you say, okay, so where are you today? What's your current state? When you start asking them questions about what they do today, how do they typically respond? Awesome. Both situations. Now, mind you, in that kind of a situation, there are times where trying to dig into current state of code is so painful, it's just not worth it, especially if you're going to scrap it and do something new. But when we say current state in this, it's typically talking about the business current state. So, in your environment, yeah. In environments that, yeah, it often is. Yeah. And, right. So most people, most organizations I've been at, I'm always the first business analyst, right? So if you're in an environment that's used to the business analysis process, it's not so much the case. But in my experience, I don't know why I'm a glutton. I don't know. I keep going to places that have never had a business analyst before. And so I relive the pain over and over. And no one wants to talk about where they are today. Like, why are we going to talk about it? It's not working. Let's go to tomorrow. Okay, well, we got to understand where we are so we don't repeat that failure, right? And we got to understand where we are so we know what's wrong. And so one of the best ways, and this is probably a good time to share this. You know, I don't know how many of you have been asked to come up with an elevator speech for a business analyst so you can like explain your value quickly. And I'm like, how in the world do I take a 517-page book and fit it into 30 seconds? That feels impossible, right? And so when I started talking about helping people with change and I start realizing, you know what? I'm Google. I'm your Google. When you open up Google Maps, the first thing you tell it is, hey, Google, take me to the zoo. What's the first thing it asks you for? Where are you today? Right? So I'm just like Google for you. For me to help you understand the most efficient path to get to your goal, I have to understand where we're starting from so I can chart that course for you effectively, right? I can help you find out where there are wrecks. I can help you find out where it's scenic. Maybe you don't care if it takes a little longer because you're going to enjoy the ride more. I don't know. But the only way I can tell you how to get where you're going is to understand where you're starting from. So that's why it's really, really important. I can't chart a path if I don't understand where you are now. So for me to understand why, how to get where we're going and why we need to get there, it's important for me to understand where you are today. Understanding your current state tells me, why does it hurt? What hurts and why? What's going on that is so painful you're willing to go through the pain of change, right? The other thing that helps me uncover, and it almost always does this, is when when we rush into change. I like to say fools rush in, there's a song about that. When we rush in, we don't stop long enough to look at the upstream and downstream. And then what happens is we may inadvertently negatively impact upstream and downstream. So when we stop for a second to understand where we are, not only do we uncover the real reasons we need to change, but we also uncover what else might be impacted from a business or a process perspective, which will tell me what systems might be impacted, so that I can do successful change. So we're not constantly tripping over ourselves. We're not constantly having to undo things because we didn't think about something else, right? That's what strategy analysis is about. It's about ensuring we're solving the right problems for the right reasons at the right time. That's what it's all about. Okay, so what are the elements of current state? We're going to talk about business needs, what capabilities and processes in our current environment help us meet or not meet those needs, what technology and infrastructure is leveraged within those processes and capabilities, what rules by which do we operate, how are we structured and how does that impact all of that, what assets do we leverage, and what things outside of our current environment influence what we do or don't do. So we're going to talk about each one of these elements. All right, so defining the needs. This is so important and it's often skipped. We need to understand why the changes are needed. And these are things that need to be strategically important. There are problems or opportunities that come up that are strategically important. Now, that doesn't mean that every need must be critical. It just means that whatever need is brought to you, it could be small and simple, or it could be big and complex, okay? But it matches, it can be traced to the strategic purpose and goal of the organization. Because if it doesn't, why are we worried about it, right? Now, what's often brought to you when someone brings a problem or opportunity to you, let me rephrase it this way. If someone goes straight to a developer, this is why business analysts are really imperative. If someone goes straight to a developer and they say, I need this button to do this, what does the developer do? What do they say? Okay. That's what they say. Because in their mind, I mean, and they're not wrong, I can make anything happen with code, right? Because you can. But the question is, should we? Should we do that? Now, what happens when a business analyst gets involved is they say, I need this button to do this thing, and we say, why? And then what we uncover is that they need 3 more data elements that we were never tracking. We need a better way to capture those. And then you don't even have to click a button to do anything. The system automatically calculates something in the background, right? Because, and then that's a completely different solution than what we would have come up with in the first place. And in the first place, we probably would have coded that button to do something, and the business unit would have probably tried to use it, and then it didn't really work, and then they brought a different problem to the developer, and we go through that cycle 5 times. Whereas a business analyst can figure that out the first time, and we solve the right problem for the right reason at the right time, right? Is one of the examples I like to use. It only works with people who have kids in their lives. It doesn't have to be your kid, but my kid, and I used this example with a gentleman that I have worked with that was very, very resistant to business analysis. He just was like, just give me the problem, I'm going to solve it. Okay, awesome. So my kid comes to you, and he was playing on the playground, and there's a small trail of blood going down his leg, right? And he says, I scratched I have a cut. And you say, oh, okay, well, let me clean that off and put a Band-Aid on it for you, right? Okay, that's what you're going to do, because you're going to solve that problem that you can see. My child comes to me and I'm going to say, what were you doing? And he's going to tell me where he was playing. And I'm going to ask him, okay, well, when you fell, what happened? And he's going to tell me what happened. And I'm going to find out that you might only see a small trickle of blood, but it was an actual puncture that went through his carotid artery. And you don't immediately see it because the blood is building up inside his leg, right? And so now you're risking my child having sepsis. So see? And he was like, okay, well, I think that might be a little bit severe of an example, but I'm like, but it's real, right? I ask why. I ask what happened then, what happened next, and why did that happen, and why is it a small trickle? And I'm going to figure out I need to take my kid to the ER to solve the real underlying problem and not the surface symptom, right? That's what we as business analysts do. Huh? And I was like, so and then I used an example of, obviously I'm in an environment in that situation where it's a software company and they instant gratification, get there yesterday, do everything really fast, and like they like Mustangs. And I was explaining I have an electric car and I evaluate not just the current light that just changed and I'm going, I'm actually looking ahead at the next light and I realize that that light up there is green right now and it's about to turn red. And I'm going to take my time, and by the time we get up there, I'm assessing all of the strategic stuff, right? And you're just solving the small problems as they come. So you're doing it more agile. I'm not waterfall, but I'm being strategically agile. And when that light up there turns green, guess what I'm doing? I'm still moving, and you're at a standstill, right? Because you got there too fast and you didn't assess the whole thing. So I have several examples that I use. It's really important that we stop and think. Just for a second, just stop and think for a minute, please. Let's make sure we're solving the right problems and we're finding the right solutions. Now, once we've done that, it's that small, you know how they say you have to spend money to make money? Same kind of an idea. Stop for a minute and do your strategic analysis so that you can get there faster, more effectively, spending less money in the long run. So now we're going to talk about where do those needs come from. So you're trying to do strategy analysis. What causes it, right? Well, someone brings you a need. Where does it come from? Sometimes it comes top down. Usually that's because your leaders in your organization have defined strategic objectives, right? And you have to do things that help meet that strategic objective. So that's when something is top down. That's usually only happens when you have a big shift. Sometimes it comes from bottom up. This is where a lot of problems are brought up that you have to solve, right? So people that are trying to actually do the daily and they're trying to keep the business moving and trying to make the company money. These people are trying to do their jobs and they just can't because the systems aren't working right. So that's a bottom up. Processes, systems, behaviors, culture, these are all bottom up issues. Maybe it's coming from middle management. Maybe middle management is trying to proactively identify improvement opportunities, but they just can't, they don't have visibility into what they need to have visibility into to make those decisions to ensure that we're being efficient and meeting our objectives as an organization. So middle management might have need. Now, middle management might bring you problems that their bottom up has brought to them. That is still a bottom up problem. Middle management usually bring problems that have to do with that midline activity of approval processes or reporting or things like that. Usually they're not bringing you the button clicking and field issues. They're bringing you the reporting or the approval workflows or things like that. And it could be that your customers are complaining. It could be that regulatory agencies are implementing constraints on you. It could be all of those other things. So business needs can come from all kinds of directions. It's your job as a business analyst to understand where that source of the need is coming from so that you get to the source of the problem and you get the real story from the right resources, because that's the only way we make sure we're solving the right problems that are strategic. And I wouldn't say it's possibly the most critical step. I would say it is the most critical step. If you get this one wrong, everything that comes after it is very often wasted. And we don't want to do that, right? So how do we describe a business need? It's usually talked about as a possible outcome, right? It's usually something like reduce processing time, increasing our customer base, improving customer retention by 10%, things like that. It's usually a description of something you would like to achieve. And it's usually something that feeds into the overall strategy. I heard someone unmute. Do you have a question? You need to understand. You need to understand where. Say that again. Just it's about where it's coming from in the organization, right? Because if you have a requirement or a need, and it's coming from the strategic area of the organization, it's important that you have access to resources that are very intimate with that so that you can really understand it. You know, you shouldn't be getting strategic understanding of a strategic goal from the bottom up. You should also not be trying to get understanding about the bottom up problems like the button clicking and the field order and stuff like that from the top. So ensuring that you understand where the need is being derived from so that you can get to what really needs to change and an understanding of the true underlying need, that's really important. Make sure you're getting it from the right place. Hmm. Right. Yes. And if you have a situation where now that's not going to be that's going to be if you have a bottom up needs, right? The capabilities of a system. But if you're early, like if you the company I'm at right now, I think I was there for 4 months and they decided that they were no longer going to be a reseller of other people's systems and software. They were going to build their own. They became a software company while I was there, right? So their strategic goals and their organization changed. I need to talk to the upper leaders about what does that mean for us? How does that impact our current processes and our current structure? How can I help you make that transition effectively as a business analyst? So I go to the upper management. Now, when we're already a software company and we're delivering value, now I need to get down to the bottom up. I need to talk to the people that use our software and the people that build our software to understand what are the detailed changes. And then when I bring those changes to the upper leadership to help describe it to them, I don't talk about the specific buttons. I keep it higher level, right? So depending on the level that you're talking to will drive what needs are you trying to uncover, what kind of information are you sharing, things like that. And we'll get into levels of abstraction later. So when we're describing our business needs, it's usually the possible outcomes. Like I said, it's usually some kind of measurable outcome that we're hoping to achieve. That's the business need. That's not your requirement. That's the business need. That's your higher level thing, right? So that's how we describe a business need. Now, when we're trying to understand how is that impacting things, there are two different ways we can look at our organization and evaluate it. There's a capability centric view. This is where we focus on looking at, so we've got this need. What are the capabilities of our organization? What are the processes we use? What are, not the process, sorry. What are the tools that we have? What's the knowledge that we have in existence? Do we have multiple software solutions and certain kinds of expertise in our environment? Can we combine those in any way to solve this problem? Or do I need to find a new solution that I implement and combine? Do I need to add capability, right? Maybe I just combine existing, maybe I need to add capability. But looking at the organization from a capability perspective, and that's about tools and stuff. But then we have process. Maybe the first thing I look at is what are our current processes? Can I modify the process in order to solve for this problem? Maybe I need a combination of adding capability and modifying the process. But it's important that we understand that we need to look at the organization from both perspectives in order to find the best combination of things that solve for this overall strategic need. So capability centric and process centric. What capabilities and knowledge do we have, and what processes by which do we use those capabilities? We need to look at both of those. When I say the word architecture, what does that mean to you? Systems, a lot of people go there. What else could architecture mean? Hmm. Yep. So how things go together? Framework, how, yes. Okay, so architecture can be all of those things, right? Now, if we're looking at the Webster version or Wikipedia, it's a complex or carefully designed structure. It's a structure of something. When we say the word enterprise architecture in the Babok, we're talking about people. Okay, we're talking about the organizational structure. The enterprise architecture is the organizational structure. Then you have technical architecture. Technical architecture is different. That's your technology. Someone said technology. When we say enterprise architecture, why don't we call it what? The org chart. Well, enterprise architecture is not necessarily as simple as an organizational breakdown. It's not just as simple as org chart. It's about functional stuff, because you can have multiple claims departments that have all kinds of claims people in them. But from an enterprise architecture perspective, that's one element that describes the organization. But then you have what's called a functional decomposition, and it doesn't care about who reports to who. It cares about how the organization's functions break down. So the most important thing to take out of this is that it's talking about, when it talks about enterprise architecture, it's talking about, it's not specific to technology. I think that's the most important thing that we should probably take out of that. So if I were to, oh my gosh. So generally defines solution environment. So it's not about technology. It's about the people, the process, the functions, and the tools. It will mention the tools, but it's not just technology infrastructure. It's about people and how they function together within the organization's enterprise. Okay, so it's like business architecture, requirements architecture, enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is processes, technology, people, operations, information, all of it together and how it all relates. So it's bigger than just the technical architecture. Does that make sense? Whole enchilada. The whole organization, all of it together. I think this red is probably not completely accurate. I know what it's trying to say. Um, so technical architecture is only going to show you, hold on. It's only going to show you, it's going to show you like how systems interface with each other, how that might lay on top of your infrastructure. Yep, that kind of, yep, all technical. And it's only going to have the technology in it for the most part. So you see how all of this is technical? This is a technical architecture, right? But if you look at enterprise architecture, spelled correctly, preferably, enterprise architecture is going to be a combination of it. So if you look at a business architecture, this isn't necessarily helpful. Hold on. So this talks about customer partner, and in your situation, this would actually have names, right? You would have, what are the external resources? How does it connect with the business? How does that can integrate with technology itself, right? So you would see strategy layer, business layer, application layer, data layer, infrastructure layer. This is an enterprise architecture. It's much bigger than technology. Not necessarily, because it's got strategy in it. You could. No, you see marketing, here's marketing, inventory, policies, IT management, shipping, finance, ERP management, and this is going to have HR in it. Administrative management. Yep. Okay, so I'm surprised they call them enterprise business analysts. When you get to that level, you're usually an enterprise architect. Yeah, and that's the more, so business analysts will dig into further detail. Enterprise business analysts or enterprise architects, they won't dig into the detailed functional requirements. They'll stay high level. They'll stay at the strategy piece. Does that make sense? Okay, and so here's an example of social media enterprise architecture. Here's the kind of people, and this is the tools they use, and the departments that support it, and the underlying technology. This is really detailed. Anyway, so that's enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is like the whole enchilada, all of it. Everything that makes up how an organization does what it does. That's the enterprise architecture. And that's what a business analyst needs to be capable of doing. Now, you might just barely touch on it. Maybe you're in an environment where, you're the person, you're the analyst, and there is no enterprise architect, and there's no, all of it falls on your shoulders. You have to be able to do all of those things. If you're in an environment that's extremely mature and it's bigger, you might have a data analyst and an enterprise architect and all these other resources that allows you to focus on specific elements of business analysis. But enterprise architects are a matured version of a business analyst, right? So understanding that is helpful, I think. So what is business architecture? So we have enterprise architecture. Business architecture lies within it. It's very specific about the current state. It talks about how is the business structured, and it's where you get your functional understanding. It's so claims, in the claims area, so you have operations, and operations has claims, and HR in these groups, and claims does these functions. So the claims function involves assessing claims and claims decisioning and claims closure and things like that, right? So it breaks it down into functional, and then those functions can be broken down into smaller functions, and that's what business architecture is all about. It's how is our organization, how is the business structured from a functional perspective? How does it operate? This helps us understand, if I change my claims solution, how does it impact that functional breakdown? So you'll see things like functional decomposition. If you have an enterprise architect, that's something that your actual EA does. Your enterprise architect does functional decomps. And then you'll consume that, and you'll say, I plan on changing this element of this solution. And then you ask yourself, which of these functional areas in the business architecture will be impacted, and is that still going to work out, right? So you'll have to take that architecture, and if you don't have an EA, you have to do that functional breakdown. You may not do a functional decomposition. It might be more using the combination of process models and org charts, right? Maybe that's how you do it, but you still do the decomposition. You just do it in your head, looking at multiple things. So business architecture is, how is the business structured? And then we have internal assets. Now, what you're seeing off to the right is technology, but that's not the only kind of asset you might have. You will also have facilities. For people to do their job, they have to have the technology, but they also have to have a way to use it, right? So maybe if you're remote, then you probably have to support those people in their offices. But if you're what a normal business does, you have a building. You have a building that people sit in. That's an asset. Your applications are obvious. Everyone thinks about the technology available as an asset. What about the knowledge base? The knowledge base is an asset that we leverage with the applications sitting in the facilities we sit in order to do our jobs, right? So those are some elements of current state. We need to ask ourselves, for example, let's say that one of the best examples I have is I worked in an organization that they needed to do legacy modernization, right? They had really old green screen technology, IBM mainframe stuff, and they needed to move to ERP. And then when they were going to do that, they realized they needed to do a lot of standardization. And so they're saying, okay, we can't keep up with technology. We can't process our claims as fast as our competitors, all kinds of things like that. We want to improve customer retention. That was what started it. The business need was, I want to increase customer retention rates by 10%. Okay, great. How do we do that? How do we keep our customers from leaving us? Okay, well, our tools are antiquated. Okay, well, then we need to fix that. And so when we start talking about moving from old IBM mainframe to legacy modernization, we realized we don't even know what our processes are. So we start looking at that. And then we start realizing that our processes are replicated everywhere. We have our organizational structure is replicated. We have for every line of business of secondary insurance, for cancer, for short-term disability, for life, for all of these, and they all have claims processes that are really similar, but we have completely different departments, and every department does claims processing just a tiny bit different. How much inefficiency is there in that? So they started realizing that their processes and their knowledge base needed to be fixed. So that was an internal asset they needed to fix. Well, if we're going to consolidate all of those things, will our facilities support? So ERP, do we need more servers or less? If we need more, is our server room going to handle it? Are the asset of our facilities going to be able to handle this modification or this change? So all kinds of things. We should be thinking as business analysts and asking these questions. If we do this shift, do we have the facilities for it? Do our processes support it? How is our culture impacted? What knowledge base do we have? So all of these things about our current state, we need to ask ourselves questions on to ensure that we think about them and identify, are these things going to be impacted by this need to improve customer retention? And if so, I need to include requirements that help us understand that from a transition perspective or just a functional requirements perspective or any of those things. And finally, as if what I just said wasn't enough, what are the things outside of us that can influence what we can or cannot do to meet this future state? So if we're going to move, so we're insurance, we're highly regulated. Insurance organizations are highly, highly regulated. So if I want to move from legacy to modernization, what are the regulatory requirements that I have to ensure that that new state will meet? And what regulatory requirements constrain our current environment? What regulatory requirements are we operating within in our current world? So obviously we have HIPAA requirements. Okay, so how are we meeting those requirements currently? How does our technology, what is our current technology platform? How is it working or not working for us to be able to process fast? What are our competitors doing? So our competitors, they're processing claims in 1 day. What is our current state? 5 days? That's a problem, right? Because our customers are wanting to leave us. Our customer current state is our customers are unhappy with our processing time. That's a current state consideration. That influences what we are doing today and what we should do tomorrow. All of these things outside of our world that are not immediately obvious to us to consider are things we need to consider. So that's current state. So we got to look at, okay, what is the real problem? How are we currently structured today? Why is that not working? What tools do we have available to us? What assets are we using? Why is that not working? What are the constraints under which we're working in? What are the current influencers externally that are causing us to do things the way that we do today, or they're causing us to realize what we do today is not working? What are current processes? What are all of that stuff? We need to consider so many things from a current state so that we can understand why it's not working. Because if we don't understand that well, the next task is pointless. Defining future state, we can't really define future state if we aren't really willing to talk about why is today not working. Sometimes when you start digging into current state, what you uncover is you really don't need a big project. You just need to tweak a process in the current state and you're done. And you won't necessarily uncover that if you're not willing to stop and visit current state a little bit. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's just, it's not in order of sequence. There's no necessary, that's not necessarily a sequence. your view of the core concept can start at any point and end at any point, right? So it doesn't start with the change or the need or the solution necessarily. It depends on where you are in your process of business analysis. So let's say that you find a new stakeholder. So you might look at the stakeholder and ask yourself, okay, I found this new stakeholder. I'm in strategy analysis right now. If I found a new stakeholder, what does that mean? Okay, well, I need to ensure that I'm collaborating with them and understand how to understand the business needs. So thinking about that stakeholder, now I might go, okay, so I'm going to go to the need. Okay, well, based on that, I'm going to go to the value or the change. So there's not, if you look at the core concept model itself, where is it? There you go. Yeah, it doesn't start with any one thing. It doesn't. It can start anywhere, and then you can land anywhere. Yeah, no, business and you guys are unsung heroes. So many people don't understand what makes you guys so special. And then when they start to realize how special you are, the first thing they respond with is what? No, that would be lovely. But let's be real. What is the first way they respond to you? When they start to realize, when they start to realize what you represent, how do they respond? Fear. They're scared of you. Once they can get over that fear and that insecurity, then they realize how they can leverage you. Yeah, the first response is fear. I have had some nasty things said to me. Oh my gosh. And I'm like, dude, all I want to do is help you. I just want to help, man. I mean, yeah, it's been fun. It's been a fun ride. I don't want to discourage anyone. I am extremely passionate about this, and I endure all of the pain of overcoming fear because of what we get to do when we're done. And the what we leave behind is an improved and hopefully happier people. And when we're all done, we all like look back on it. It's just like, sorry guys, you can't necessarily relate to this, but it's like having a kid, right? You go through the problem process and you're like, oh my God, this is painful. This is awful. This sucks. And then you have this amazing thing at the end. And then somehow you forget how much all that hurt and you're willing to repeat it. Right? As business analysts, we're so focused on that beautiful thing at the end that we're willing to go through the pain of change constantly. Your life as a business analyst is constant change. And what's interesting is the people that come and go in your life as a business analyst, they experience change momentarily. You live it all day, every day. And you love it, hopefully. I love it. Maybe I have psychological issues. I don't know. Any I noticed that you didn't say no, you don't have psychological issues. Okay. All right. So it's time for a break, and then we need to come back. We still have 3 tasks in this knowledge area. So pretty soon here, I'm probably going to have to ask you what you would like to do about that. But we're going to take a break.